Ladies and gentlemen, ASEAN's future centers of growth, policy challenges in CLM countries, is the broad title of our topic today. CLM, Cambodia, Laos and Myanmar, in the past used to be talked about in terms of CLMV, Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar and Vietnam. These were the countries whose economic condition and position within the ASEAN nations was deemed to be suitably different from the others, such that they needed to be considered in a slightly different light. Since then, Vietnam has moved forward to join much more closely with the other nations, and CLM are much more of a contiguous grouping now. So those are the countries we'll be focusing on today. We'll be asking how we can concentrate on making sure that those countries join up as quickly as possible with economic development of the other nations, such that we don't keep hearing, as we do fairly frequently, people from some of these countries saying, we're still quite scared about the prospect of being part of this big project because we fear that it might be detrimental and somewhat damaging to our own economic prospects when we're faced with these big economic competitors that the other nations represent. So that's where we're going to basically focus our conversation today. And I have with me a very distinguished panel to help us do that. To my immediate right, Professor Fukinari Kimura.
Thank you.
Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much.
He is the chief economist at AREA, and he's one of the prime driving forces behind this book, and he'll be explaining much of this problem to us. Michael Nelson is the vice president of communications at Google, based in Tokyo. Going to bring a digital perspective and a slightly more anecdotal flavor to our conversation today. Dr. Kensuke Tanaka is with the OECD. He is the head of the Asia desk at the OECD. And Dr. Soteya is also with the area. He's an economist there, focusing on these markets as well. Gentlemen, thank you for being with us. Dr. Tanaka, I'll begin with you if I might. Just in terms of understanding the problems of why the development status of these three countries might be an issue. Can you tell us how far removed they are from the others and why we should be concerned?
Okay, thank you. So maybe I will mention 3 points in this question. The first thing is strong growth momentum. If you look at the past 3 years, the growth momentum of these three countries around like 7 and 8%, which is much higher than the OECD average and much higher than the ASEAN 6 countries. And of course, there are some risks like inflation and inflation pressure and dollarization and so on. But in general, growth momentum is very strong. This is the first element. And the second element I would like to mention is actually that you slightly mentioned about the gap between ASEAN 6 countries and CLMV countries. But I think the still gap remains in some areas. For instance, poverty and also the human capital area. So that's another issue. And third element is that each country has a different actually structural policy problem, notably agriculture and natural resource management. These are sort of the big picture of these three countries.
Why is that a problem, though?
Well, I think we really have to have a sort of higher income, a better life, of course. And then still the average income level is low. The growth perspective is good, but we really have to change the industrial structure from, say, primary sector to secondary, tertiary sector. And at the same time, a very large portion of our population is still in a so-called informal sector or rural area. We have to move those kind of people to formal sector or much more productive sectors. And then that pushes up a sort of poor paid people up to the middle income level. That's what they really have to do in coming years.
Is there any merit to the fear, as I mentioned a moment ago, that a lot of business people seem to have, and that is that the ASEAN economic community, the development of ASEAN as it's going, is actually a threat to some of these countries and to some of the businesses operating within those countries?
I think the answer is no. I can give you an example of Cambodia. In the process of nation building, start as a post-war country, enjoy the peace evident after the Paris Peace Agreement in the 90s, start open up, and ASEAN is one of the platforms that the country aspire to become a member. So Cambodia used this as an opportunity to connect, to integrate to a wider economy. And it's a very natural experiment for the CLM, at least CLM country, that actually by integrating into the regional economy and the world economy at large actually have a merit than the vice. We've seen the high economic growth has been mentioned by Dr. Tanaka, and substantial poverty reduction for the past 3 decades. So in general, I think by integrating, using the regional platform as a domestic reform actually help country move forward.
That's the economic perspective. Like from a business perspective, an international corporate perspective, is there a difference between CLM countries and the rest of ASEAN?
I would say yes, but I'd broaden it out a little bit. So I'll just speak about the web in general, and I'll take much more of a market approach rather than an economic one. But when I look at it from the web, 80% of the languages on the web are in 10 different languages. 80% of the content on the web is 10 different languages. More than 50% of the content on the web is in English, but only 5% of the people in the world are English speakers. So I think the next generation of people who come onto the web are not only going to be not native English speakers, they're going to come onto the web on mobile devices. They're going to be very, very social. They may not be able to read and write. They'll have to speak first and maybe write later, and that creates a different web problem for it. So I think what's happened in the past with economic development around some of the digital technologies is going to take a dramatic shift. I think the world is moving mobile first. To some degree, it's moving mobile only, and I think all of those changes are happening here. So from a Google perspective, and other colleagues of mine who work at companies similar, we're investing in the fundamentals of what that means and getting content on building infrastructure out, making sure that there are ecosystems. I sat in an earlier panel that you did today around micro businesses, around small businesses, about creating startups. I think that's hugely important. I just sat in on the women's panel, and I think more of the economic opportunity on that unleashed power is really important. So I think from our perspective, it is different, to answer your question. I think it's much more of an early stage investment, to use a financial term around it, and a lot of that is based on building an ecosystem.
So high economic growth potential, high economic growth in reality right now. That, in theory, is a good thing. I mean, that's a positive development. But
yeah, of course, yeah. Right.
We're differentiating on the basis of economic growth. How do we manage that growth to make sure that countries like these are going to join the others?
Right. I think after the year 2000 or so, developing countries in the whole world are growing pretty fast, say, including, say, sub-Saharan African countries and others. But most of them are based on, say, resource-based growth sometimes. But in East Asia, in many countries are really generating employment in manufacturing sector, plus some related services sectors. So I think the quality of growth is quite different in a sense. If we have a sort of good development in productive sectors, then that generates employment, particularly for poor people. So they are moving from informal to formal sectors. And I think that is very important to have a sort of pushes up a sort of poor people. And many East Asian countries really are sort of successful in generating that kind of employment. So CLM can follow that kind of model too. I think that's a very important aspect that we have to talk about.
Maybe I would like to add a little bit more about the growth issues. I think we expect a strong growth in these three countries, but there are some risks. One risk probably I would like to mention is a high dependency on the external demand. And I think also the share of the export to GDP, not only the share of export to GDP is high, but also for some countries like Cambodia, the export is more or less focusing on the garment industry. And in the case of Laos, the destination of trade is focused on Thailand, which will be more around 65%. These are some of the risks for the growth and the vulnerability. And the second point I would like to mention
the risk being the concentration.
Yeah. Like a diversification is probably required. And then the second point is a current account deficit. And I think these three countries are current account deficit, basically. And then it's supported by the FDI and also the ODA. But especially in terms of FDI, I think these three countries still need to make an additional efforts. And also probably the inflationary pressure still exists. It's also related to the strong credit growth of these three countries in the past years. and also the dollarization for some countries. For instance, in the Cambodia, dollarization is probably around 80%. In the Laos, it's more than 50%. So these are potentially the risk, we think.
Can we break down the relative models of each of these three countries a little bit more in terms of what they are focusing on to generate their growth? I mean, you talk Cambodia is focusing on the garment industry, but are there particular strategies that are being adopted to try and bring these countries into line?
Back to your question about the inclusive to sustain this high growth, start from a very low base economy. But looking at the experience of Vietnam, actually, they start with a focus on agriculture as a core development strategy that's very important for poverty eradication. So a lot of investment in R&D, extension to increase the agricultural productivity. If you look at the statistics, Vietnam with the agricultural land about 10 million hectares, but the contribution of agriculture to GDP around 30 billion. But as compared to Myanmar, the country, according to FAO, the country have around 12 million agricultural land, but the contribution to GDP is still pretty low, around 18 billion. So a lot of room for agriculture development for this country to come. To diversify the economy to a more value-added production sector, Professor Kimra has been mentioned about actually the diversity and the low-income status actually can be an advantage for this country to attract FDI, to start with a very basic cheap labor-intensive industry such as garment and move up to a high value chain production. But we can also see the potential challenges, especially for a country like Cambodia and Laos, that they may lose the competitiveness even in unskilled labor. There's a lot of cross-border migration, especially for those engaged in agriculture. So the country, these two countries report to have some shortage in unskilled labor. But at the same time, the education, vocational training program is not effective enough to upgrade the skill of the workforce, so they face difficulty to attract the higher value-added production.
We'll dig into the specifics of those things as we go through the conversation. But in terms of assessing development paths, speeds and potential, I mean, does Google monitor this sort of stuff? Do you have a benchmark, and do you have a
we like numbers. So yes, we do. But yeah, there's also a general sense, and I do think that all of this is early. So let's Cambodia. I've spent a fair amount of time this year in Cambodia. I was there as a guest of the government in March when we recorded Angkor Wat to preserve it. So we have Street View technology that takes pictures of streets, but we took pictures of Angkor Wat as a way to preserve it. It was one of the largest collectives that we've ever done. It's one of the most popular that people visit on the web, and it will help tourism. People will see it and they'll want to go there. But the reason I bring up Cambodia is that I was a guest of the Minister of Commerce. I say guest. He had asked me when I was at Angkor Wat if I'd come back to speak, and of course I said yes, and of course I forgot. And of course he called back. So I found myself in Phnom Penh 8 weeks ago speaking with him to 2,000 university students. And the point of the talk was economic prosperity through innovation of technology. How can you apply technology in a way that helps the economy? And in digging into that with numbers, I found a couple interesting things. I found that the internet penetration in Cambodia right now is about 10%. Doesn't sound very high. But when I started looking at 10% historically, it's a pretty good tipping number. My company was founded when the internet penetration was 10% in America. Some of the most popular apps on smartphones were founded when the penetration of smartphones in those companies were 10%. Line in Japan, 10%. KakaoTalk in Korea, 10%. So my message to the students of Cambodia was that create it yourself. start to code, and that the web needs Cambodia, it needs Laos, it needs Myanmar, more than on equal terms that they need the web. I think that it's a dynamic participation sport. So the way that we look at it is to do fundamental technologies, to record images here in Myanmar. There's a complexity with the font. It is a beautiful but complicated language. And the way that that has rendered itself on the web is around something called Dodgy, and I'm probably destroying it. I don't speak the language, but it is a representation of the font that technically won't let it scale over the internet. The industry standard is Unicode. So this is an instance where we'll come in, we counsel on the movement to Unicode. Now's a pretty good time to go to Unicode, and then that font will be discoverable and scalable on an international basis. So when we do look at the numbers, we also engage kind of at a fundamental level just to help overall and hope that we'll create.
Penetration in Cambodia, 10%. What about Laos and Myanmar?
It's a little bit lower. I don't have the figures off the top of my head, but it is lower.
Not at the tipping point.
It's not quite, but it's not as bad. And the smartphone, when we look at the growth, like I was joking earlier about the SIM here in Myanmar. When I come into a country, one of the first things I like to do is get a SIM, get a phone locally. The voice service lit up immediately. I had no problem with it. It took me about 2 hours to get the data service. I needed access points. They didn't understand that I needed access points. But once I got on, it was pretty fast. The smartphone penetration is I've been here, 6 weeks ago I was here, and I'd imagine that it's accelerated dramatically over time. So I look more at the trend and the acceleration rather than the hard number, and I would say here in smartphone penetration is extraordinary. As prices are deflating, the penetration of smartphones is accelerating, and that would get more to this mobile internet moment.
But I mean, that issue, that penetration, I mean, that's a low base effect right there. I mean, at this stage of the game, nobody has smartphones, and so it's going to be extraordinary, as is the growth in general terms. But to what extent do you think the technologies that Mike is talking about are going to be part of the solution to getting these countries up to speed?
Oh, definitely. Even in a kind of traditional industries like manufacturing or some part of the services industry, I think a development model changes completely. So in the past, goods cannot move very quickly, and also we cannot really communicate with each other across national borders. So we just say that a sort of industry by industry division of labor. So this country is a labor abundant, so labor intensive industry is good. This country has such and such resources and concentrate on these industries. We have that kind of industry by industry division of labor until say mid-1980s. But after that, we have ICT revolution. Then even in manufacturing sector, even in a very complicated, say, machinery industries, we use various kinds of parts and components. We have that kind of production process-wise or task-wise international division of labor. Because we have communicated with each other, so we can really separate out, unbundle so the production processes, tasks across national borders. So Southeast Asian countries are really utilizing that kind of mechanism. So in case of Thailand, Malaysia, typically Singapore too, of course, they are not really making the whole thing. They are just doing a part of production processes, just a part of tasks. Then they operate across national border at the same time. So because of the transportation, logistics, because of communication, so the coordination is much more easy and cheap to do that. That's why we locate some production processes in, say, Cambodia or Laos or Myanmar. We can then actually CLM can jumpstart industrialization. So already Myanmar or Cambodia are doing a very traditional type of industries like a garment, but the movement is very slow. Just a big procurement of textile from China once in 2 weeks, and making baby clothes and export to the US just once in 2 weeks. That is a very slow type of production networks. But now, say, part of, electric parts in factories in, say, Cambodia, for example. Then they have a truck shuttle from Bangkok metropolitan area to Phnom Penh. They can go through the same truck. They don't reload, actually. And just go through the national border and minimal check, and then going through the Phnom Penh and coming back. So that kind of things is possible. as well as a sort of communication. That's much easier than before.
And very valuable practical
Yeah.
advancements in doing business.
Right.
But I mean, let's sort of shift it from this sort of general outline then to more specific areas. There are the practical ones, but there are the policy ones. What are the policy challenges that these countries are facing?
It's in the context of the technology and ICT.
In the broader context
In the
of having
broader
to
context,
achieve a rate of development that will get them up to speed with the rest of their ASEAN partners.
I think the policy challenge will be different by country, but maybe I just like to a little bit add a complementary comment with the two previous speakers. And in terms of technology, I think the technology anyway is a key for these three countries. At the moment, I think the attractiveness of these three countries are more or less the low labor cost, but gradually the human capital development is necessary for the further catch up. And especially in this context, I would like to mention that the two issues. One issue is that still in these three countries, access of education is important. For some country of ASEAN, I think it's now gradually moving from access to education and quality of education, but still access is an issue. Another issue is not only the supply side, but also the demand side. For some countries, actually, I think the return to the education is not appropriate. In that case, actually, there will be no incentive for some of the students to learn or get higher skills. For instance, maybe in the case of Philippines, it's not, I think it's CLM countries, but the drop rate in general is very high compared with other ASEAN countries. But this is a rational behavior for the student because like a wage premium after getting the like a master degree or PhD degree is very small. So I think the education system also need to be more incentive compatible from the demand side as well. In terms of the policy challenges of the different countries, let's say I will give you a rough idea of these countries. For instance, in Cambodia, clearly the agriculture is an important element, and especially I think additional investment in the modern rice milling facilities and so on, and also in general the modernization of agriculture is very critical issues. But for instance, in the case of Laos, he already mentioned, but the natural resource management, especially the mining sector, these are very critical. And also, it's also, good for the managing the volatility from the commodity price as well. This is actually related to the export performance of these countries. And then I think in Myanmar, actually, there are several issues, but I think these countries actually attained so many achievements, especially the private sector development in recent years. But there are some issues like this. For instance, one issue, at least OECD think it's critical, is like education issues, and also the financial sector development. And I think to provide a good access to the project for firms.
I mean, let's think about ways in which each one of those is being addressed. But you also were talking earlier on about manpower issues.
Yeah.
Explain why that's an issue.
Can you repeat it?
You were mentioning that the issue of workers' skills and the availability of manpower in various sectors is a developmental challenge.
The fact that the fast growing economy like Cambodia is facing is they can be complacent in terms of investing in education and vocational training so that they can build up the capacity of the labor force as well as the absorptive capacity for firm for technological transfer. So that's what's happening. If it's not too late for the country, we have a champion, a new minister for education that embarked upon this kind of reform in the education system, so that to avoid, I would call it the dilemma to fall into lower middle income trap, not even to the middle income trap. So by not losing the competitive advantage in unskilled labor, but at the same time too soon to lose no competitive advantage in attracting more skilled and capital intensive FDI for the industrialization. So this issue need to be addressed why the economy grow at a very high level.
I agree that, development of traditional industries is important, education, human capital development is important, but those takes time, and what would be a sort of trigger to jumpstart industrialization? I think that's much more important in the prioritization in policies. So in case of even in traditional industries, say like agriculture or resource-based industries, say once we have a sort of better connectivity, then the business model can change quite drastically. So saying a sort of a low quality of connectivity, then in agricultural sector, everybody is doing rice and other things. But once they have a good connectivity, they can have some vegetables and others carrying into urban areas, for example. And that raises the income of agricultural sector a lot, actually. And in the human capital development too, we need some sort of trigger, how we can motivate people to have higher education. I think we need industrialization. So I think that in priority, we really think of a sort of accelerating industrialization, particularly at the stage of CLM. I think that's extremely important. And then in case of, yesterday the president of Myanmar said inclusive connectivity. I think inclusive connectivity are even different words get together, but connectivities are really solving some part of inclusiveness issues, actually. So by enhancing connectivity, some economic activities can move from Thailand to Myanmar, for example. We can have, with better connectivity, some production processes would come to Myanmar. That would really pushes up industrialization in Myanmar. So I think we really need that kind of things.
I've been struggling to find an economic vocabulary to fit in. So I look at myself, and I came from an economic status of scarcity, and I believe now I'm one in abundance. I wanted to be a journalist.
On a personal level?
No. Professionally, certainly. And here's why. I wanted to be a journalist when I started out. And to be a journalist, I had to find someone who hired me who owned a newspaper. And that meant they had to have a printing press, and that means they needed to have structure. They needed to have all of this infrastructure around it, and then they had to hire me over someone else in order for me to write. None of that exists anymore. If I want to write, I can write. I can be on a blog. I can tweet. If I tweet right now, 1 million people can follow me. When I wrote for a newspaper, it had 100,000 circulation, and that was pretty good at the time. So I look at what in 25, 30 years ago, what I was in an economic status that was constricted and constrained around a manufacturing element. But with the internet, with connectivity, with communications, it becomes abundant. And anecdotally, I know plenty of examples where someone with just a really good idea who had an app, who was on a phone, was able to distribute that. We were talking earlier, their Muslim Pro is an app that was developed out of Singapore, but it allows people, Muslim, to find places to pray based on what the time of the day is. It's hooked into Foursquare so they can find mosques and whatnot. German Ramadan, it had 100,000 downloads in one day. It's downloaded 10 million times already. It was just based on a good idea. So I think the connectivity and the communications at a fundamental level is what resets the playing field for a lot of this. So there are certainly conditions around it that are difficult. I would say education is one of them. There's a woman, I want to represent the women on the panel, she's not here. Her name is Lynn Ha, and she works for us. And she's the voice hunter, we call her. And her job is to voice sample around the world. She's been to 60 countries. She travels 230 days a year. She's sampled millions of phonemes in order to get voice samples so we can do voice search around it. She has an initiative to participate with governments and help around STEM education. To help Girls in Tech is another one of her foundations that she cares deeply about. So I think it's not either or, it's kind of both and more. Like if you can do the fundamentals around improving the education in a way that's kind of thoughtful, creativity. I think having icons is really important. She's certainly the voice hunter is one of my icons. I think she's awesome. But then also encourage people that this is a participation sport. We're in an area of abundance, and the optimism in my mind is greater than ever before.
If there's anyone in the audience with a particularly interesting accent or dialects, then please contact the voice hunter.
It's kind of fun. She does it based on acoustics. So what we try to do before we do voice search, and I don't mean to derail it, but it's kind of fun. She goes and she'll take acoustic samples of a word. So if I said konnichiwa, and my daughter said konnichiwa, and my wife said konnichiwa, and then the native speaker said konnichiwa, and then they said it in subways, and then they said it in crowded rooms and halls, and then you parse those phonemes. So she'll get an acoustic model and then map it to a lexicon where it actually means a word, and then do that hundreds and thousands of times. And then we're at the point where we launch it and it's still kind of bad. And then by people using it more and more, the phonemes map to the lexicon model and the predictive model even more and more over time. So she's a wonderful person.
But look, I mean, there's no one doubts that the potential of technology and already realized in the West and in Japan and many countries is amazing, and it can help in almost any field, any endeavor, any industry. But in the countries we're talking about, you know, we have a fundamental absence of infrastructure to use technology. We have a fundamental absence of familiarity with the process and the potential of technology. These must be hindrances.
Yeah, clearly, yes. I think in terms of the enhancing connectivity is anyway critical for these three countries. And then I think at the moment, CLM country in general could make use of the benefit of regional integration more. For instance, at the moment, if you look at the inter-regional trade, let's say from late 1990s and the beginning of this year, I think it's developed a lot. It's more than double from that period. But if you look at the connectivity in the area of ICT or like human capital, these areas are quite lagging behind. So I think region need to make more effort to these two areas, I would say, to strengthen the cooperation.
I just want to chip in the technology part, how Cambodia use this kind of regional integration and liberalization to attract FDI in that sector. Surprisingly, you may not know that Cambodia adopted the G3 technology very early. And they opened for 100% ownership of those telecommunication provider. At one point, we have 10 providers to very small markets, like 15 million people, but it's under consolidation. So these are a showcase of how we can use leverage on this integration, liberalization to attract quality FDI and adopt new technology to the country. And the application is pretty steadfast in terms of mobile banking. It have a lot of reduce all the transaction costs. There's a social aspect as well for those workers working in concentration in the capital city, how to transfer money back to their rural area. So mobile banking and money transfer become a very one of the effective way in Cambodia. That's the practical application of technology.
You started talking about policy. I think ASEAN is doing ASEAN Economic Community and also so-called master plan on ASEAN connectivity. I think those two initiatives are extremely important for CLM too. So because by doing that, actually things can move much faster and quicker, and also the time cost is much shorter, and we can rely on that kind of movement. Then more economic activities can move to CLM too. And also, so that in order to do that, they call so-called institutional connectivity and also physical connectivity. And the institutional portion says customs clearance standards and safety standards and others. Those are coming in. And also in the physical connectivity, we really need the Myawaddy-Yangon highway. Right? So then Myawaddy-Yangon highway really boosts industrialization in Myanmar. I think we really need those institutional connectivity, physical connectivity, so together with a sort of economic integration. So AEC cannot do everything actually. AEC is particularly in economic, the so-called first pillar, single market and production based. But the single market is too difficult to achieve at the, immediately. But integrated production base, that's what we can achieve. CLM can come into the integrated production base with the neighboring countries and also East Asia. AEC is really prioritizing that kind of elements. I think that's a very important initiative for CLM too.
Let's look at the individual nations, if we could, for a second. I'd like you to sort of point out what you think are the single biggest challenge in each one of these to actually achieving what they want to do. And if you would address, please, and I'd like you all to, I don't want to bring politics into the equation because ASEAN's nature is to be collaborative on this and not critical, but are governments pursuing the right policies? Do they have the commitment that is required?
Maybe I think we already discussed the human capital infrastructure main issues. Maybe one point probably which is missing is probably the financial aspect. Maybe I think I'd like to mention that still the credit growth is gradually growing, and then the financial sector is still weak, and then dollarization, high level of dollarization exists. And then this probably potentially the issues in terms of the credit channels from for the firm to get the appropriate fund to do the project. I think when it comes to the regional level, I think the regional integration in the area of finance is also still additional efforts are needed.
So the financial thing is for you the key challenge for these three countries in terms of their development?
In addition to the challenge we already mentioned. Yeah.
Your thoughts on that?
I could pick up the land reforms, land use right, and land titling. It's very crucial in the early stage of the development because it appears in many others discussion about access to finance. Actually, the land titling is crucially important for SME to use that collateral for their access. So this issue had to be addressed and try to avoid the bad example. For example, in Cambodia, we pursue a kind of so-called large land, economic land concession to a big corporation with little regard to the farmers. So that's something that not been applying in Vietnam. They using the different model of land reform. So such a kind of lesson should be taken seriously. For example, in the case of Myanmar, how to rationalize those kind of land ownership, because this is the crucial aspect of inclusive and narrowing development gap.
35 minutes to go.
Sorry, I have to ask the time because it's back on now because that was dying. Let's then look at. Did you want to address that issue? Sorry, go ahead.
I think the land in related to the land acquisition. Maybe I agree with it, but maybe it's also related to probably the PPP of these three countries. And usually the land acquisition is actually the key large obstacle for many ASEAN countries, like even Indonesia and the Philippines. So I think this would be probably.
I agree that those are, of course, important, but some are very difficult. It takes time. So I think the immediate thing that they really have to do is investment promotion. Definitely, investment promotion. How to host foreign direct investment, how to promote investment for domestic firms. I think that's an immediate task that they really have to do. So that would solve many problems automatically, I think. So human capital development is important, but we cannot do like human capital development first, then we complete that, then go to industrialization. It's not like that. It takes time. So immediate thing, we really have some economic activities here. I think we really have to prioritize like that. That's very important, I think.
But you would think that investment promotion was already at the top of the list in terms of priorities.
Yeah, but
is that not the case?
It's not enough.
It's not
not enough. Still, it's very difficult to make investment, for example, in Myanmar, I think. So it's very difficult to make.
So you mean making it easier as opposed
Yeah. Then improvement of investment climate is not so easy thing. So you don't have to do everything in the whole country. So that's why we are talking about, say, industrial estates and others. At least in this specific industrial estate, we really have to have very good investment climate. That's a starting point. And the same thing happens in Cambodia too, and Laos too, I think. We really need those immediately, and that will change other things eventually. I think we really have to prioritize like that.
It's to answer your original question about things that the country should want or need. I kind of listed entrepreneurial first. I think people need icons, vision, and hope. And I think of Cambodia, just because I've spent so much time there this year, and the minister, Chantal Son, is hugely charismatic because he came out of Cambodia right after the Khmer Rouge, didn't speak English, had $50 in his pocket, washed dishes in Los Angeles, learned English language, eventually graduated from Wharton, went back, got his advanced degree at Harvard, came back, and now he's in Cambodia trying to help Cambodia. I mean, he is a role model for anyone that thinks that it's not possible. This guy is working for the government, shows that it is. So I'd say that entrepreneurial spirit. I would say for policy, I look at it a little bit differently. I look at what are the regulations being imposed on industries like the internet. I would say thoughtful regulation. There are some bad things that happen on the internet, and too often the reaction to that is to over-regulate. So I'd say some patience around that. Regulations often have unintended consequences. So the behavior of some of people, organizations on the internet, and it's true of all these countries, need some help. There needs to be a hygiene around that and a protocol, but I wouldn't over-regulate as a way to fix it because that would have an unintended economic consequence. And the third is social patience, that a lot of these technologies are new. Some people are afraid of them. I'd say that we should accelerate the technical back end in it, but certainly there's patience around how they'll shape and model economies.
Let's put on a, sorry, go on.
I want to choose one, another aspect of policy is trade facilitation because...
Is what, sorry?
Trade facilitation.
Trade facilitation.
Make it cheap and faster for moving goods and services across border. This can be done, and member countries have to take it seriously when we already complete the tariff elimination. So the issue lie on the harmonization of rule and law, regulation, standard, and everything like that. So these are the crucial and very important reform that ASEAN, especially the CLM country, have to undertake in the promoting trade.
I think, I agree with the importance of investment promotion, but actually the investment promotion requires a sort of a comprehensive package of the policy package. It's also related to infrastructure, education, and finance, but also related to the macroeconomic stability. For instance, if you look at the recent political unrest in Thailand, actually the FDI dropped because of that. So I think this need to be addressed in a comprehensive package. And also another thing in terms of investment promotion is now, I think these three countries at the moment, I think the comparative advantage is more or less the low labor cost. But in the future, country actually need to be more strategic to find beyond the labor cost.
But the question here is which is the cart and which is the horse, isn't it? I mean, for sure, those are the issues that need to be addressed, but are they being addressed and in the right order? I think that's what we're talking about, isn't it?
Yeah.
Do you think the governments are addressing those very points that you've made?
Yeah,
are you encouraged by how that's working?
Government already addressed. I think, for instance, if you look at the medium-term plans, I think these elements are already included. But in terms of implementation, I think it's very slow.
As far as you're concerned, are the structures in place, are the institutions in place that will allow for either investment promotion or the encouragement and the enrichment of all those other institutions to actually succeed and proceed at the right pace?
Yeah, definitely. Some elements are immediate, like as macroeconomic stability. We really need that to attract investment, for example. But some are maybe it takes time. So we have to start, but it takes time, like human capital development. But the investment promotion is very important. Once we get the investment, so both foreign firms and also domestic firms, I think that's extremely important. That really change people's incentives and also government's priority. And I think that's a sort of a trigger to step up. So to me, it's really, really concentrate on that. And the investment promotion, some part is not really related to other things, actually. Even it doesn't take much time and money too. So if we have a very good hosting agency for investment, like I say BOI, Board of Investment in Thailand, they are really taking care of foreign foreign investors and also domestic investors a lot. So that kind of facility is very important. It's not very expensive actually, but many countries cannot really do that kind of good things.
Let's look on the positive side. What are these countries doing right? Where are the really high points? Let's start with Cambodia, of what's happening and their potential to actually be a future center of growth.
I mentioned about the peace dividend and then the demographic dividend in terms of abundant labor, and then now it's a political dividend. Country undergone the democratic process and then they settle the political deadlocks, and those political parties come forward and put in a dialogue in a constructive manner. This provides certainty, stability it's very crucial to attract FDI. So I think they're on the right track, and reform, Sun Chantop is a champion. He's came into the process, introduced automation, simplification, all kind of reform that's pro business, pro trade, pro investment, such a kind of mindset that can be on a positive note.
How would you rate Cambodia's progress in relation to the other three? I mean, and are there specific sectors, specific industries that are really shining and would be attractive to foreign investment?
Now it's still very concentrated on garment, but there's emerging more investment in automotive and electronics. So I think there's a hope that the country can further attract such a kind of high value added industry into the country with such a reform-minded government.
So some machinery parts and components producers are moving to Cambodia recently. Laos too, actually, they start moving actually. And also some agriculture sector are actually selling those products to Thailand, for example. So the connectivity changes their business model, I think. That's gradual, but we observe a sort of changes, obviously.
Would you say that we should look at these economies not in terms of their national or geographic identities, but in terms of their cross-border business linkages and connectivity?
Yes. I think as of Myanmar, still we have that kind of connectivity, but it's still pretty slow. So most of them are very extremely sort of labor-intensive ones, garment or footwear, not in kind of machinery parts and components yet. But there's very good potential for Myanmar to do this kind of business once we have better connectivity.
I mean, everyone talks about the potential of Myanmar and the natural resources that are available, the nature and the demographics of the country make it, on paper, a particularly attractive destination. But is it necessarily going to be the shining star in these three? Economically speaking?
In Myanmar, you mean? Yeah. I think the case of Myanmar, actually, there are many things we could address, but I think one of the issues, I think the one is the large potential, I would say, is probably the relatively good level of the human capital development compared with other countries, compared with the level of the development, and also geographically Myanmar is located in a good place, and this actually is a benefit for the connectivities. And at the moment, I think in general, in terms of the inviting the private sector, I think Myanmar did relatively well in the recent years.
Google keeps all the stats. What did they tell you about these relative rates of development?
Yeah, I don't have them off the top of my head, but if I'm able to take out my phone, I could. It's an area, we think of it as still emerging, and we think of it as an investment. Anecdotally, I think that we're seeing a little bit more traction in places like Cambodia. Myanmar, I think, still has some fundamental elements that they have to get right, and we're more in the consultative era around that. I'd say the same is true around Laos. Vietnam, I know it's not, you don't have a V on this, but Vietnam is just extraordinary in terms of what they're doing. Like here's a stat that for the people in Vietnam who have a smartphone, 80% of them use music. If you take any country in Europe, less than 50% have music. I mean, they're still thinking of smartphones as phones, where in Vietnam, they are computers and they're being used as computers. And I think that spirit of freshness and newness applies. I mean, Flappy Bird came out of Vietnam. That's not an accident. We're keeping an eye on these things. We're investing where we can in a technical infrastructure and cooperative layer, and we're certainly helping with education.
Let's see if we can widen the conversation a little bit. I mean, there's an audience here who's obviously engaged with a number of these countries and a number of these ideas. Does anyone like to contribute to what you've heard or ask a question of our panel? Please join in. So, there's a microphone right there if you...
Yes, I'm Omin from MRD, in Myanmar Marketing Research and Developments. We are discussing about the Center for Growth. We discussed many things, I saw that. But we would like to know what will be the key driver for rapid growth in the future. There is, for example, it should be FDI or export or SEZ or industries, tourism. Which sector will be the key driver for example, for Myanmar, especially for Myanmar? For example, SME, we can say that the SME is an engine of growth, but there is no way for Myanmar. But because of so we have many limitations here. And another thing is, so we have the policy orientation. We have 3 polars. Previously, we have 2 polars, Yangon and Manali, as a center for growth. But now it's Naypyidaw also the center for growth. That we can be the 3 polars. For policy, focus should be area focus, or sector focus, or institutional focus. Thank you.
A lot of issues and areas there. Professor, any thoughts?
Yeah, the first one, as I said earlier, in the past we are saying so-called comparative advantage theory. This country is good at this industry, this country is good at this industry, so we have to do international division of labor. That's an old model. Actually, in machinery industries or in some industries, we have the international division of labor in terms of production processes or tasks. So naturally, machinery industries, including general machinery, electric machinery, transport equipment, those are sort of champions for utilizing this kind of mechanism. So you certainly have to have priority for machinery industries as a whole. But other industries can utilize a sort of similar model too. So I think the companies will choose where to locate and what sort of activities would be located in Myanmar. So I think that's a sort of central part of industrialization. Certainly, you have to make some sort of decision, like for some extremely capital intensive and not really appropriate for production networks, like iron, steel, or chemical industry. Those are slightly different animals. You have to make a sort of decision whether or not you would invest on that or not. The second question, so 2 polars, I think that's a good idea. So Yangon is going to be a very big city, and this is a full-size industrial agglomeration eventually. So you need some sort of diversification to Mandalay, definitely. So I think that's a good idea. I buy that idea from Kudo-san. But at the same time, you need some sort of border area development too. It cannot be on a really large scale, but by utilizing wage level differences and others across national border, you can attract some economic activities inside Myanmar. So I think this is another thing that you can do. So that will generate rural employment and also maybe good for ethnicity issues too. So I think I buy that kind of development in case of Myanmar.
Okay, a bit of additional comment. I think usually we see these things that, the sort of, in terms of industrial policy, like picking sector is a bit, picking sort of a champion and sector is a bit risky choice. And of course, we think that this also requires a certain level of the capacity of government as well. But on the other hand, I think there are some good industrial policy, for instance, subsidies to some of the sector like education and infrastructure. These are actually, I think, appropriate to proceed. And in terms of sector, in general, I think that there are still room to strengthen the tourism, especially for these three countries. Because if you look at the gap between ASEAN 6 countries and the CLMV, actually the gap, especially in the area of tourism, is very small, which means that these three countries are still very competitive. For some countries, like strengthening the ecotourism and so on, these are actually another, I think, interesting sector for these countries.
Any thoughts on that?
I like the idea of SME development because I've done a lot on that. So actually to help SME, very often people talk about injecting a lot of money and things like that. But there's a fundamental, cheaper way of doing and supporting, just especially advisory and information. So these are not too expensive. If such a service available to guide the SME, what sort of way to access to new technology by leasing or buying a new machine or things like that, what sort of market opportunity domestically and overseas, such kind of information is very crucial. SME themselves cannot do the market research, hiring Boston consulting firm or anything like that. They cannot afford that. So these are the low-hanging fruit that government can support. And building in other infrastructure for finance, for example, to liberalize the banking financial sector so that you can bring in all those cheap capital overseas, or risk management system like credit risk bureau, guarantee scheme. Not necessary to have a full-fledged SME bank that have been discussed in the morning, but even you have the SME dedicated bank, as long as it professionally run, it run as a private profit-seeking institution, then it doesn't matter.
Maybe just a short addition. I think Myanmar has a tradition of some manufacturing sector. So you could, in the past, you could make cars and everything. So you have metalworking and small machinery industries too. I think this is very important. That's quite different from Cambodia and Laos. So the issue is that whether or not those kind of guys can be a part of international production networks. So say big assemblers would come to Myanmar, then whether or not they can be a sort of important parts and component suppliers. I think this is a sort of a big challenge, but you have much better chances compared with Laos and Cambodia because you have that kind of tradition. So you have a big population. You cannot really live with a small industry only. Actually, you really need a sort of core part of the manufacturing sector.
More questions, please. While we're thinking about that, to the next one. Yes, sir. While we're getting in the microphone, let me just tease out one final element of the last question, and if anyone would like to quickly address this. What part do and should special economic zones play in these three countries? Anyone like to address that? Go ahead.
So, special economic zones are sort of experiments. So if we have a better investment climate everywhere, then that's better, of course. But it takes time to do that. But locally, we can do that. And then once, say, investors are coming in and make an operation, you can find many troubles, actually, small troubles and others. We do troubleshooting, and that will improve investment climate as a whole. So I think this is a sort of very one way to make a sort of a learning over there. It's a sort of experiment, but we can learn from them, and that's a sort of quick way to make the investment climate as a whole. So I think this is very important.
So.
Ming Lawa, thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Chonai Aum. I'm representing Myanmar Industry Association. And I understand that we are discussing about the policies. And of course, we have some policy in a country or every sector. Now we have to change, as our politically change in our country, we have to change our policy in line with the other countries. Now, with these changes, what we are facing is a policy is driving to law, is one of the basic points to the law according to our policy. So, for example, we have an environmental policy, and then now we have an environmental law, and then we have environmental regulations. So this policy change affect directly to the local SMEs. What I mean is the SMI, small and medium industry also. The industries are suffering because of these environmental law, because they are restricting on the industrial wastewater treatment system or something like that. This is presently we are facing from the industrial sector, because if you talk about the development, most of the developing country or developed country use without policy or this law started with the development first and then environmental later. So, but we are considering to be harmonized with this one, because most of the international expertise also suggests us we have a good chance to make a balance with these two, development and the ecosystem. This makes us, my point of view, is a little bit constrained to our development, because our SMI are very old and very weak. We are surviving ourselves. With this additional policy and laws enforcement, some of the factory already closed. So I would like to suggest your comments on this one. From now on, what shall we do with the new policy? Because now there are more policy are coming and driving to us to be here in our country, like energy efficiency policy, SMEs policy, so many policy like this policy will not stop at that point. There is going to be a law and enforcement, like a mandate to and volunteer to mandate. So this is my question that please suggest us. Shall we take these policy first, or should we take the development first?
Thank you very much for your question, and it's a very good question. Environmental policy and its effect on economic growth.
Well, I could think about example of Malaysia, Bermuda Task Force. The role is to bring the conversation of the private sector and government together with respect to any impact of policy or law regulation you just mentioned. So they can do it pre-adoption or after the adoption. What is the burden, what is the cost to the business? And bring in the discussion mechanism and solution on the table in a transparent manner, acceptable to all parties. That's the way that they've been implemented in Malaysia. The example of how to deal with such a kind of implication of a policy, law, regulation on the business, how to solve it. It's very difficult question to whether you think about environment first or development first. I think there may be a balance. There should be a certain grace period of the policy implementation, mechanism to mitigate it, to adopt, to provide incentive. The government can, for example, provide some sort of grace period in terms of tax credit or some way that you can have a breathing space to adopt and comply with this stringent regulation. So there has to be compromise and way that both sides, the private sector and the government, can accept it. That's all I can say.
I think that for environment, the people have quite different perspectives, person by person. But so economists would say that we have to think of social cost and social benefit. If we really pursue zero pollution, then that costs a lot, extremely high. So we have to think of a sort of social cost to have pollution and social benefit to remove pollution. So we have to have some sort of balanced policy. Otherwise, it's very, very difficult to make a sort of healthy development of industries. So it's very difficult, but we have to have some sort of way, not kind of really extremely zero pollution or 100% pollution, but somewhere in the middle, sort of reasonable way to regulate those kind of issues. I think that's very important.
The underlying message, though, being that you cannot pursue economic growth now in the way that we used to. Environmental considerations are an essential part of everything.
Yeah, and that's a good thing, I think, in a sense, because so we don't want to have excessive pollution, but going to be zero pollution is a sort of too extreme. Actually,
Right.
that's cost too much. So.
I think in general, and the growth and also the environment is basically consistent ideas. And I think also the one aspect of the environment is actually the environment, business, and loans or so on create a job opportunity. This is also actually another benefit of this environment-led growth in the context of inclusive growth. And for instance, in the case of Myanmar, for instance, like the case of Thailand. The Thailand created a development plan focusing on the green growth, and I think the green growth is a sort of the core of the development plan. So I think in the case of Myanmar, for instance, still I think these elements are not rightly included in a comprehensive manner. That's also probably another way to pursue, because for instance, if you look at other Southeast Asian countries, when let's say some countries try to focus on the environment issues purely managed by the environment ministries, usually it didn't work well. But this should be well organized with other relevant line ministries. That usually works.
Sorry. Another element is that if we have more efficiency in production, then say we have less consumption of energy, for example, then actually less pollution. So I think the efficiency in the production is very important element too. So in order to promote actually the environment.
Is there an interface here for you, Mike, between growth and environment?
As you might imagine, we use a lot of energy in data centers, and we have a lot of energy generated from them. We try as much as possible to use green energy. It'd be great if it's more advanced. One of the things we did when we decided that solar was important is we put tiles of solar on every single roof and surface of their campuses to learn more about it. It's a difficult topic. I agree. You've obviously thought much more about this than I have.
It would be interesting to know what you think. I mean, you brought the issue up, and it's obviously a very live question. Do you think that they should prioritize the environmental issue here, or we should focus first on growth as the developed countries did in the first place?
Yes, for me, as I'm also an engineer, we know about the efficiency and also how to protect the environment harmful substances. For example, we need the energy very badly, because energy means a lot to us, not only the electricity, but also poverty reduction and health education. So in this context, we need energy. The best renewable energy is hydropower. But some of them would like to encourage a coal-fired power plant and saying that the clean coal technology or something like that. I had luckily attended October last week in Singapore in the Energy Week, where I also attend a dialogue in the clean coal technology dialogue. So I also question these panelists like this. So if you are Myanmar citizen, what should we choose the energy source? So all of them favor to the renewable energy, not the fossil energy. This is solution why we get it. So for here also, development, we need some of the exemption period or something like that. That's why I make call on the AEC SOS for our industry sector, because our local SMIs will be dying if the AEC is coming because of free trade. We cannot compete our product with the international manufacturer. For example, people are starting to drink a Coca-Cola from the Blue Mountain. Nobody like to make it like this. So with the AEC, our industry, small industry will be dying, that one. So
That's it.
my question is, we would like to take a development first and environmental later.
Thank you very much indeed. Any more questions? Yes, sir. There's a microphone on the stand if you want to. Oh, okay, one coming to you.
I think the panel shared some of the policy focus for CLM countries, and my question, which is somewhat pertinent into the previous, the gentleman who asked the question, is to what extent CLM countries will need to evolve their policies in response to the AEC, and to each panel member, right? What, in your view, is the key policy that requires change and adjustment for CLM countries to react to the ASEAN economic community coming together, and the potential opportunities that AEC presents itself?
Okay.
The core part is, of course, tariff removal and services and investment liberalization. So they really have to make a sort of liberalization step by step, just like as written in AEC blueprint. So that portion is the hardest part that they would follow, particularly in the tariff portion. Say in Vietnam, they have a sort of big debate that how they would keep the automobile industry over there. In Myanmar too, probably for some industries, will be affected by tariff removal too. So I think that's the one policy challenge that they have to go. But I personally think that they have more benefit than cost for adjustment. So.
Like at the technology level for Google, is
I mean,
that?
it's pretty simple, and our internet regulation should be more open than closed. I think that out of fear, a lot of governments close internet regulations, and that has an untoward effect and unintended consequences. So I think of, very simply, I think economies grow when small companies get big, and there should be a means by which small companies get big in addition to protecting large companies.
Yeah, I think at the moment, the major achievement of the AEC is like trade areas, like tariff reduction and also and other trade facilitation. But I think in general, other than trade, the progress is very slow, even in the investment and the finance. And notably, I think the infrastructure, poverty, and human capital development. And these two areas, actually, the region need to be more attention. And in some area, for instance, like green growth, these areas are not really rightly addressed within the AEC. That also probably need to be addressed, I think.
Actually, the CLM country actually is very open relative to the more advanced member country. If you look at those area of open up, even in some of the service and agriculture and the like. The way forward, I think, is more responsive public sector to respond to the private sector needs and tailor the policy to address those choking point constraints that prevent private sector from unleashing their full potential. To do so, in a lot of, the CLM country public servant is not well paid to serve the public. So there have to be way to provide incentive, make them more effective, respond, and more capable, bringing all the capable staff to support the private sector. You can't support the private sector if you don't know the area, the business well, better than the SME or the business that the government is supposed to do. In order to do that, I think public administrative reform also very important, to be more responsive to the need of the private sector.
Any more? Yes, at the back.
Mingalaba. I'm Mark O'Grady. I'm the Regional Commercial Officer for Southeast Asia for the U.S. Commercial Service. I think the panel has been very interesting thus far, and I wanted to say we've got a visionary multinational company who is known for its corporate ethic of recognizing innovation regardless of whether it's within the mainstream of what the organization does. And then we have 3 of the major research organizations in ASEAN, including Channel News Asia. and I think the question has been asked several times along what are the key focuses, what are the things that you think we should be focusing on in Southeast Asia. So I'm trying to ask it in a different way. So for all three organizations as well, where if you were to be given $1/10,000,000 or $100,000, where would you take that money and try to invest it or put it towards an effort that you personally think would help move ASEAN and move the CLM countries towards better economic development?
Challenging
I'll
question.
take it first. So in 2 words, mobile first. So I was in Taiwan last week, and I was at an event not unlike this, and it was talking about application development in Asia. And there was a guy we flew in from Australia who was a PhD in optoelectronics. And what he had done is he had produced a microscope that was field grade, micron level, out of a droplet of gel on the back of a cell phone. And it cost him $1 to manufacture it. And he was thrilled that I'd brought him to Taiwan to talk more and more about it. But the fact is, he produced it for $1, and he's going to sell an awful lot of these to scientists who are studying worms and trees and leaves and bugs and being able to go out and examine them and take photos and video of them in real time. I think especially here, right here, like today at lunch, we were talking to someone from the Tourism Bureau who was talking about his cell phone 2 years ago cost $3,000. A year ago it cost $1,000. 6 months ago it was $500. Now I'm able to buy a SIM phone and play with it. I think that what is going to happen innovatively around mobile technology is going to happen here first, and it's going to blow people's minds off, and that's what we're interested in. So I would invest in mobile applications around any particular area that people are interested in, because I think the innovative spirit around having a phone that's a supercomputer for the very first time in your hands is going to create some really cool stuff.
I would say, in terms of policy areas, I would say like property, human capital, infrastructure. These areas are potentially, I think, a very important area. For instance, in the case of education at the moment, ASEAN sort of a university network and so on already exist, but it's still a sort of a network. It's not like a practical implementation to enhance the quality and access of education. But I think in addition to that, probably the missing, especially at the moment in AEC initiative, is probably the capacity of the, for instance, ASEAN Secretariat or someone who actually implement and monitor the initiative. There are plenty of initiatives, but I think probably the capacity to implement and follow up these things are still, I think, lagging behind. For instance, compare with the establishment at the period of European Union, I think the number of the staff and so on are much different. These are probably another issues, I think.
I will put it in the venture capital so that this fund can channel to the entrepreneur in this region. So I think that the return would be pretty high.
Yeah, we need many important things. You have sort of different time horizons. So immediate one, medium term, long term. But at least we have to solve some critical paths right now. So that's, I think, investment for connectivity, enhancing connectivity, and also investment promotion. I think those are a sort of a bottleneck right now. So we really have to put some money over there, I think. Investment promotion and also the enhancing connectivity. So.
Any final questions?
Don't forget channelization. Did you have one?
No.
Over there.
Any final questions?
Tim over there.
Over there. Last one.
I'm Umian. I'm an economic advisor. Now, talking about Myanmar, what are the constraints, let's say there are 4 types of capital. We have institutional capital, okay? And then we have physical capital, and then we have human capital. One other capital is social capital, building trust. And I'm a little worried about this. We don't talk about it very much, maybe this is political, but I just want to remind you, one of the things that really, at least it worries me a lot, to carry on forward. What the president did, we never expected. This is something we would not, let's say in 2009, know, the greatest astrologer in Myanmar could not have predicted we are having a meeting like this now. Okay. Now I want this is a big opportunity. I don't want to miss this opportunity. And the danger is the social capital. And I just want to remind you that maybe it's political, but it's important.
Sorry, you said the danger is social capital.
Yes, I'm saying having social capital trust, that you got to have. That is the thing that is worries us. You know, if you look at the government, if you look at the business community, the social capital seems to be not working well. That is one thing I want to remind you.
Very quickly, a final word on that, guys. I mean, social capital, government, and political commitment.
I agree with that. So social capital should not be mislooked.
But is there enough?
Not enough, of course. There have to be all these elements together. But we should not overlook the social capital aspect of it.
Are governments committed enough to this growth path in a proper way?
I think in general, you know, the governments need to add additional strengths in terms of the commitment and the implementation. But also, I think in the case of, I think the Myanmar, I think that sometimes the plan and so on is probably not lightly addressed or not really quantified. But these are probably the challenges.
You spoke of freedom of information. Are you getting a sense from the people that you talk to in this region that there is a commitment to using the internet in a way that is accords with Google's view?
Yes, I would say so. I'd use, I thought about this prior. I'd use the Philippines as an example. I know it's not CLM, but it's close in that they're confronting some cyber crimes law and the way that they're doing it. It's scary stuff. They're including ISPs, media, internet companies, activists. They're including a whole lot of people in a discussion. It's a difficult discussion to have. And I'm seeing more and more of that, so I'd say yes.
Trust and social capital as a determinant of growth.
It's true, but if we say trust and social capital, then we don't know what to do. So we have to be more specific.
You can't measure it.
We have to be more specific. Say that would be a say dispute settlement mechanism, or laws and regulation, or go to temple and pray. We really have to specify what to be the trust and social capital. Otherwise, we can't really solve that.
But I'm glad you brought up the question, sir. Thank you. And we'll call it quits there. I'd like you to thank my panel, Dr. Sothia Dr. Kensuke Tanaka, Michael Nelson, Professor Fukinari Kimura. Thank you all. Please express your appreciation to the panel, ladies and gentlemen.